Hello, everyone. This is Fadi, and with me here virtually in our studios, Dr. J. Smith, and we've been unpacking a number of doctrinal issues comparing the doctrine or the theological worldview from an Islamic point of view and from a biblical or Christian worldview. Today, we are going to unpack yet another important topic. This time, it's the topic of incarnation. And obviously, I don't want to jump ahead of myself or anything, but just one verse in the Bible is so powerful that I think one way or another, it will tie into the discussion. And the Word became flesh. And that's what we mean by the incarnation. The Word, who is God, appearing to us in the flesh. That's why Jesus is God incarnate. Of course, with me here, as I stated, is Dr. J. Smith to unpack all of that. Dr. J, welcome back.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, we've said this over and over again in this whole series that when you look at the two different categories of God on this side versus God on this side, when you look at Trinity on this side, when you look at humanity, sin, salvation, atonement, all of this, when you look at the two, you'll see we're talking about two different categories. They use the same names, but completely different categories. We saw this with atonement. And at the end of the segment on atonement, we said, well, who is this one who's going to do the atonement? Because atonement has to be done by he who was sinned against, but is sinless. Has to be sinless himself. Sinned against and sinless. Otherwise, there's no way that someone, and the Quran agrees with this in chapter 6, verse 164, and chapter 53, verse 38. Anybody who has burdened with sin cannot take on another sin. They're already sinful. How can a sinful person take on another person's sin? It has to be a sinless one who does that. Now, for the Muslims, they don't see this. In fact, every Muslim that I've talked to and those who are listening, you say to me all the time, there's no way in the world that Allah would ever take on human form, would become as a flesh. Because this would pollute him, this would corrupt him. I remember Ahmadiyya in his debate, I'm not sure who he was debating, but in the middle of the debate, he started screaming, how can you say Allah became a man? A worm, and he yelled it out, a worm. How could Allah become a worm? That's how corrupted we are. Now, so at least he got one thing right. We are corrupted. We are sinful. We all know that. Even the great clerics know that. And certainly in this case, Ahmadiyya knew that. But here's the difficulty. I can understand if that were the case, that he would see Allah would be corrupted. And he was just really reflecting the weakness of Allah. Allah is very corruptible. That's why he doesn't dare enter time and space. That's what of the Ahmadiyya is telling me. If Allah came to earth and he is your God, and he's the only God you got, and he gets corrupted, then I would suggest that's not a very powerful God. In fact, that's a God. If God can be corrupted that easily, then I was wondering, what kind of God do you worship? You need a bigger God than that, and certainly a lot more powerful God than that, and certainly a lot less corruptible God than that. My God can come to earth anytime he wants and not be corrupted whatsoever. And you see that incarnation is not just there in the Garden of Eden. That is God walking and talking in the cool of the day. That is God. His name is God, and he is seen as God, and he is there able to take on human form. So from the very beginning, my God can take on human form. That's not the only time he was wrestling with Jacob. If he was wrestling with Jacob, he better have a pair of arms and a pair of legs in order to wrestle. He took the children of Israel through the desert. For 40 years, he was a pillar of cloud during the day, and at nighttime, he was a pillar of fire. My God can take on any form he wants. Muslims, do you see what you're saying when you're saying God cannot take on any form, cannot enter time and space? You're limiting God. You're taking away his Akbar. He's no longer Allahu Akbar. Can stop saying that if you say he cannot become to earth. But hold on a minute. I'm going to take you to another place where God came to earth. Exodus chapter 3. God was there as a burning bush. Now, you Muslims know that you have the same story. It's right there in chapter 20. Open up your Quran to chapter 20 and read verse 10 to 14. That's an amazing story, because in that story, Moses, he sees in the distance a fire. He sees in the distance a fire, and he just wants to see what that fire is. He wants to see what it's all about. And he comes towards the fire. And as he comes towards the fire, he wants to take some fire to go and start his own fire. As he approaches that bush that he sees that's burning and doesn't get consumed, a voice comes from within the bush in verse 10. In your Quran, not my Bible, though it's in my Bible, but I'm talking about your Quran now. In your Quran, and the voice says, "Oh Moses, take off your shoes, for you're on holy ground." Now, hold on, Muslims. Holy ground. If it's holy ground, does that mean God's there or not there? Can you have holy ground on earth without God? Can be a holy ground any place? Or does it not demand that if it's holy, it must be that Allah is there? Am I correct? If it's holy ground, you know Allah is there. Otherwise, it's not holy. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Suggesting that in verse 10, Allah is in that bush, right?
Yes,
No, you
absolutely.
still don't like that? Well, then read verse 14. Continue on to verse 14, because then the voice from within the bush says to Moses, "Truly, I am Allah who is speaking to you." Here is that bush that's burning that takes on the name of Allah. Now, can anybody take on the name of Allah but Allah himself? Bingo. Can you see a problem here? You're starting to see the problem. Is Allah in that bush? Obviously, if it's holy ground, he must be there. And if he claims to be Allah, it must be him. Nobody can claim to be Allah and not be God, proving that certainly in chapter 20, verse 10 to 14 of your Quran, Allah is in that bush. And where is that bush? It's on earth. And where's in front of Moses? So in 1400 BC, when this event is happening, Allah must have been in that bush, must have been on earth at that time. If he was in that bush at that time, as if you're going to have to admit, if you don't like that story, you don't want it, you're going to have to tear it out and throw it away. You're not going to do that to the Quran. Can you see a problem? There is a problem for you Muslims, because in chapter 20, it's also repeated in chapter 27, you have Allah on earth, which means if he can do it in 1400 BC, he can do it 2,000 years ago. Bingo. So the incarnation does exist in the Quran, whether you like it or not. God at one time did come to earth. And if he did then, that means he can do it anytime. But hold on. Why is it he had to come to earth? Why is it? Well, we know the reason why is because in order to eradicate sin. In in the Bible, it's very clear that in Philippians chapter 2, verse 7 to 8, Jesus Christ, it says, who did not consider equality something to be grasped, took on himself the form of a servant, humbled himself, it says in my translation, to the point of dying on the cross. There it is right there. That is the reference point that I want to see, because it's in the Bible very clearly that God came to earth to fulfill what he had done to the very beginning. At the very beginning in the Garden of Eden, when he's there with Adam and Eve, and he has condemned them for the sin they have done, he turns towards Eve and he says, "Someone from your line," that means it's going to be a male. Well, who is that male? Remember in the last episode, I was going to say who it was. We need to go to Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. In Isaiah 7, I'm making it really easy for you folks. 7 is the perfect number. Double that is 14. In Isaiah says this, "For this shall be a sign." Wake up, folks. "A virgin will conceive." Now, hold on a minute. In my existence, virgins don't conceive. If virgins start conceiving, they're no longer virgins by definition. Am I correct? Scientifically, that is impossible. But in your Quran, you know there was one virgin. Chapter 19, verse 20 of the Quran, it's very clear there was one virgin, Virgin Mary. Mary was that virgin. She did conceive and bore a son. So what does Isaiah say? "For a virgin will conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel," God with us. So when that woman who's in the line of Eve bears a son, she will be a virgin, to know that this is something miraculous. This is not normal. This is out of the normal. This is a miracle happening. When that happens, folks, it is God with us. Oh, I love it. That's why I love my Bible, and that's why I love the whole scope of history. It all makes sense. What God promised there in Genesis 3 to Adam and Eve from the line of Eve had to happen through a man, he who would come to earth, and that man would be Emmanuel, God with us. Muslims, you know who that man is. His name is Isa. You know who that virgin was. Her name is Mary. It's in your Quran. See, these are beautiful little flags right through scripture that help us to understand who is it that God promised right at the very beginning. He already did that because he's our daddy. Our daddy, who's relational, was going to come himself. He had to come himself. And he had to come through a Virgin Mary. He promised there for 800 years before it happened, there to the prophet Isaiah, so that we could know and recognize him when he did come. Folks, it happened 2,000 years ago, and his name is Jesus. Now, what we're going to do in the next episode, we're going to have to say, well, where do we get all this from? We get it from revelation. But what kind of revelation? We're going to find we have two completely different kinds of revelation. One is relational, the other isn't. Guess which is which. Until the next episode, this is Jay here. Over to you, Fadi.
Thank you. And this is Al Fadi, over and out.